Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but whenever any living, breathing organism brings up the Dallas Cowboys, many differing emotions immediately rush to your head, and depending on your age, you may remember the good old days when a man with a cool hat won a lot of games, or when a lovable coach and others rebuilt a team from scraps to find themselves on top of the world, and all that is great, but in more recent years, the consensus view of the Cowboys has grown more and more goofy. Seriously, in the modern age, nobody respects the Cowboys at all, and to go from a team that was once deathly feared by every opponent thrown into the Coliseum to face them to a pushover is not easy. It takes time, effort, a pair of scissors, bad draft picks from time to time, calculated mistakes, injuries, and one crinkly old man who thinks he's the most important person in America. And after all that, that is how you tear down a winning culture and turn the Dallas Cowboys into everyone's favorite NFL team to get a good laugh at. With that, it's time to go back, and I mean way back, to the year 1988, where the Dallas Cowboys were real stinky, finishing off a rough 3-13 campaign, and were in desperate need of changes to pretty much everything. And what better way to do that than to get a brand new owner of the team? And on February 25th, 1989, Dallas signed a blood pact, and the hero of the Cowboys, who also had a bit of a dark side to him, Jerry Jones, purchased the team for a measly $140 million, changing the destiny of this organization forever. So just like that, Jerry Jones was in charge, and now that the paperwork was out of the way, just a day after becoming the owner/general manager, Jerry had to face head-on likely the biggest decision he'd ever have to make in office, as at this point, the Cowboys were coached by Dallas icon Tom Landry, who had been the coach there for the last 29 seasons and counting. Simply put, Landry was the Cowboys, and the only coach the team had ever had in their franchise's history, so moving on from him didn't even seem possible at the time. But at this point, Tom Landry honestly just didn't have it anymore. Over his last 3 seasons, Landry's Cowboys had a record of 17-30, not logging a single winning season, and it seemed as if the famed Cowboys coach, at the age of 64, had the game pass him by. So on his first day as the new owner, Jerry Jones denied previous Cowboys owner Harvey Bright the luxury to fire Tom for him and did the deed himself, fully bearing the burden of announcing the firing of Tom Landry after near 30 years of service, proving that at the end of the day, the NFL really is just a business. And if Dallas fans' nostalgia-laced hearts weren't already ripped out and mangled by the new Sith Lord in town, they had to watch Tom tragically clean out his office for good and give one last tearful goodbye to his players, as the Cowboys' new owner seemingly acted as if it was a regular Monday and officially announced Landry's replacement in his college roommate and former University of Miami coach, Jimmy Johnson. Now, if all of this somehow wasn't enough for the Dallas Cowboys to lose even a little bit of credibility around the league, when Dallas finished their first season under Jerry and Jimmy with the second worst record they've ever had, the pitchforks and torches were out, and the entire state of Texas wanted Jerry Jones's head on a silver platter. Except, if you look a little deeper, the Cowboys were clearly building something, and after flipping their franchise running back in Herschel Walker for an endless supply of picks, and then in 3 consecutive drafts, the Cowboys picked up the 3 last Infinity Stones they needed, and from there on out, the Dallas Cowboys dynasty was ready to blossom. And after 2 seasons in 90 and 91, where the Cowboys developed their youth, Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson regained the trust of the people of Dallas and won back-to-back Super Bowls in 1992 and 1993, solidifying themselves as an NFL dynasty. So, all seemed great on the surface, but if we just rewind a little bit and look back at the 1993 season in particular, that's where we see the first couple of cracks start to become viewable to the public. See, over the past couple of years, the Jerry Jones-Jimmy Johnson relationship began to predictably deteriorate more and more, as when you have two men with insatiable egos who were both crucial pieces to building one of the most successful dynasties in the Super Bowl era, they can't just share the credit. No, that would be just unreasonable. One of either Jerry Jones or Jimmy Johnson had to be overwhelmingly more key to the achievements of the Cowboys over the other. But even with that, throughout the 1993 season, the Cowboys were still slicing through the regular season with ease, but tension continued to rise as Jimmy Johnson grew increasingly frustrated with Jerry Jones's Eugene Krabsness when it came to paying people who weren't strapping on helmets, and refused to increase the payroll of Jimmy's assistants in guys like Norv Turner, Butch Davis, and others who had been imperative in the Cowboys' success thus far. Now, the reason I laid that little information dump on you is to give at least some potential reasoning as to why right before the Cowboys' most important game in Week 18 of 1993, when the Cowboys took on the New York Giants to decide which team would earn a first-round bye, Jimmy Johnson unintentionally lit a campfire under his own ass, as he received a normal phone call from, at the time, the expansion Jacksonville Jaguars, who didn't even have a team yet, asking Jimmy about the qualifications of the Cowboys' current offensive coordinator Norv Turner, seemingly interested in hiring him to be their first ever head coach. So, Johnson picked up the phone and told the Jaguars, yeah, Norv would be good for the job, but, you know who would be better? Me. This discussion didn't really go any further than that, and even worse for Jimmy, that little under-the-table shenanigan ended up getting leaked to the media before their matchup with New York. But regardless, the Cowboys brushed this little kerfuffle to the side, and off of arguably the greatest performance a running back has ever had by Emmitt Smith and his one shoulder, the Cowboys dynasty just kept moving forward, taking care of business in the NFC, and won their second Super Bowl with Jimmy and Jerry at the helm. So, hey, they won again, and these two dudes who clearly think one is still smarter than the other seemed like they could at least moderately tolerate each other as they won Lombardi after Lombardi to heal their wounds. But as history has shown us across various sports, winning can only hide a nice seasoned slab of beef for so long. And unfortunately for Dallas, a deadly combination of one too many drinks, a lonely Tuesday morning, and Jerry Jones by himself would blend together to bring the beginning of the Cowboys' end. The story goes that Jerry Jones suddenly showed up to a cute little football party where all the Cowboys' assistants and Jimmy Johnson were having a great time. But when Palpatine decided to butt into their conversation and awkwardly made a toast to their success, nobody raised their glasses, and of course, from their perspectives, why would they? After all, Jimmy Johnson was the one they were all loyal to, not the guy who barely paid them and sat in their Oval Office all day. So, after getting his poor little heart broken, Jerry retreated to a nearby bar all night long, where, unfortunately for him, it was absolutely crawling with reporters. And of course, one thing led to another, and after some time, Jerry Jones, perhaps unintentionally, told reporters that I could step out and hire Barry Switzer as coach of the Dallas Cowboys tomorrow, and he'd do a better job than Jimmy, revealing that he believed he had the important job, not Jimmy. Jimmy was replaceable, he was not. So, after something like that goes public, there's no going back. And just a few days later, in order to get around the legal aspects of their contract, Jimmy Johnson and Jerry Jones said they mutually parted ways. And on March 29th, 1994, Jimmy Johnson was no longer the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. And just like how it happened 5 years prior, immediately after severing ties with Johnson, Jerry Jones hired former University of Oklahoma coach and future flesh puppet Barry Switzer to share the outrage of the fans with Jerry, just like how it all went down with the firing of Tom Landry. So, I guess Jerry Jones was going to have his way, and we would now find out once and for all if the Cowboys could win without Jimmy Johnson in the Barry Switzer era. But with a team as loaded as the 1994 Cowboys were, of course they were great again, going 12-4, but losing in the NFC Championship game to an all-time great 49ers team, in large part due to a slow start and a controversial no-call pass interference on their soon-to-be ally Deion Sanders. So the first year with Switzer could have gone better, but entering 1995, the Cowboys once again reloaded and logged their third straight 12-4 season, as the defense was still great and the offense didn't miss a beat, even with the loss of longtime wideout Alvin Harper, as career-defining seasons from all three members of the Cowboys' offensive trio continued to lift this team to near untouchable heights. All that was left to do was prove they could win another Super Bowl without Jimmy Johnson. Except the players didn't really want to prove Jerry right. In fact, pretty much every player was on the side of Jimmy Johnson, especially All-Pros Emmitt Smith and Troy Aikman, who we'll get to in a minute, and the only guy who felt bitter about the falling out a few years back was Jerry Jones himself. So after the Cowboys continued to follow the rules of the rock, paper, scissors meta in the NFC for the 90s, defeating the Packers in the NFC Championship game, the Cowboys found themselves in Super Bowl 30 versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, where, before the game, Jerry Jones maybe took things a little too far, and, from his own words, made a deal with his own God, saying, "Oh, damn it, Jerry. If the Cowboys win Super Bowl 30, I'll never ask to win the Super Bowl ever again." Seems like just a small little offhand statement, but as this video goes on, I want you to keep this little excerpt by Jerry Jones in mind, as there might be some truth behind this little curse he said on himself. And you know, maybe there's a chance Jerry didn't even have to do all that warlockery, as before the Super Bowl, Dallas was the overwhelming favorites by almost 2 whole touchdowns. But before this game, we did get to see more of those cracks in the Cowboys organization, this time being made by Barry Switzer himself, as leading up to the Super Bowl, the Cowboys' head coach, the man who was supposed to be dead set on game planning as much as humanly conceivable before the biggest game of his life, instead chose to live his life to the fullest and turned his goddamn hotel room into a 24-hour rave with random people coming in and out whenever they pleased. Barry Switzer fully believed, hey, I'm never going back to a Super Bowl, so I might as well have as much fun as possible. Not even thinking about football for a singular minute seemingly, while the few Cowboys players that attended these raves was shocked at how different Barry was than their former coach, with Emmitt Smith in particular continuing to lose his faith in the Cowboys management by the minute. And I'd love to keep going on and on about this bonkers situation. I mean, Barry was so lost in the sauce that he had his current girlfriend sharing a hotel room with his fucking ex-wife, who was there for some reason, but remember, there was still football to be played. And as the game began between the Cowboys and the Steelers, the Dallas experience proved to be too much for Pittsburgh, and off of a few crucial Steelers turnovers, the Cowboys never trailed the Super Bowl once, and defeated the Steelers 27-17, adding their third Super Bowl to their trophy case in just 4 years. Well, I hate to admit it, but it seems like Jerry was right. Sort of, because although another coach did technically win a Super Bowl in the position that Jimmy Johnson once held, as I said before, these guys were still Jimmy Johnson's players and respected him more than Barry did. And as the 1996 season began, things really began to fall apart, as unlike Jimmy Johnson, Barry Switzer's coaching style was way more hands-off. So when players like Michael Irvin began getting into some legal trouble and constantly showed up to practice wasted, what did Barry Switzer do? Well, he did nothing, being a little overly considerate with the players, something that star quarterback Troy Aikman did not appreciate. You see, back in the day, Jimmy Johnson kept every player, no matter who they were, on as tight of a leash as possible, whereas good old Barry Switzer was a little bit more lenient, forcing Troy Aikman to basically become more or less the coach of the Cowboys over Switzer. And with the stars of the 90s for Dallas aging more and more, and Aikman having to try and contain all kinds of unjust rumors both on and off the field, after 2 seasons without an NFC Championship appearance, Barry Switzer resigned, thus beginning the true era where the Cowboys started to lose their soul. So with Barry gone, you'd think maybe things would only get better from here, but they just didn't, as not only were Cowboys players becoming increasingly more free, Jesus Christ, in the neck. But Jerry Jones also seemed to be infected by the curse he set upon himself more and more by the year, as although he was a bit of an arrogant man, he had still proven he had an eye for talent, or at least he hired people with an eye for talent, and ahead of the 1998 NFL draft, it seemed as if the Cowboys were set on drafting the perfect young guy they needed to reignite the Big Three in Dallas, when Jerry Jones personally told Marshall University wide receiver Randy Moss that they would select him with the 8th overall pick in the draft. It was going to be a match made in heaven, because not only did the Cowboys need some fresh legs, but Randy also had the Cowboys as his #1 destination. So with the 8th overall pick, the Cowboys didn't take Randy Moss, which is not the end of times, as the guy they did take, Greg Ellis, will be a pretty good player for a while. But, you know, I just felt like this kind of had to be said. Yeah, Jerry instantly regretted this decision, and it's safe to say with hindsight, Randy definitely would have been pretty helpful, and the Moss himself made all Cowboys fans wish he was wearing a star helmet instead of a purple one when he dropped one of the most famous stat lines in NFL history, catching 3 touchdowns from 3 receptions on Thanksgiving that year. And after an unceremonious exit in the wild card in 1998, losing 20-7 to the Cardinals, Dallas's fuel just kept running lower and lower. At this point, over the next 4 seasons, the Cowboys weren't the same team anymore, going 23-41 over that time period, including 3 straight 5-11 seasons, as Jerry Jones and Cowboys fans watched in horror as both Michael Irvin and Troy Aikman's careers ended prematurely due to a freak injury in Irvin's case and about 8 or 9 too many concussions for Troy. Simply put, for the first time in so long, the Cowboys lost their fear factor around the league, had no future, no legendary coach at the helm, and no winning culture whatsoever. And after Emmitt Smith broke Walter Payton's all-time rushing record in 2002, he too eventually found himself on the NFL's retirement home. And just like that, Jerry Jones was pretty much one of the last men standing from a once great Cowboys dynasty. And from here on out, things are about to get real dark for Cowboys fans. But for the rest of us, I'd say it's time to get a good laugh in. Now, since Jimmy Johnson and Barry Switzer were both pushed out the door, the Cowboys have had coaches in Dave Campo and Chan Gailey who weren't even an eighth as commanding as Johnson. So I'd like to think some realization came over the Emperor's brain when he went out of his way to lure an old-school, hard-nosed, successful coach out of retirement. But more on that much later on, as for now, the Cowboys officially hired Super Bowl winning head coach Bill Parcells prior to the 2003 NFL season. So just like that, the tuna was in town. But questions remained if he could somehow share personnel decisions with, statistically speaking, the least liked sports personality in America. And somehow, maybe Parcells could bring a little bit of Jimmy Johnson back into a very uninspired Dallas team that was becoming one of the biggest jokes the league had to offer. And if that were going to happen, that transformation was going to take some time, as after another interesting Dallas Cowboys offseason, the Cowboys walked away from the 2003 NFL Draft with a very solid corner in Terrence Newman with the 5th overall pick, as well as one of the best tight ends in NFL history in Jason Witten late in the 3rd round. But even with those 2 invaluable pieces, this draft class ended up providing the Cowboys with their first small glimmer of hope in the post-Troy Aikman era. After the draft concluded, Cowboys quarterbacks coach Sean Payton reached out to a fellow Eastern Illinois alumni quarterback named Tony Romo, who at the time wasn't in the best mood, and offered him a measly $10,000 to come play for the Cowboys. Now, other teams were offering Tony around $20,000 or even $30,000, according to Tony Romo himself. But when you're the Dallas Cowboys, America's team, you have all the leverage, and of course, Tony couldn't resist this opportunity, and the undrafted rookie was brought in to compete for a roster spot. And you know, he almost won the job too, as in a quarterback room consisting of the untouchable Quincy Carter and Chad Hutchinson, this job seemed wide open, and after a strong week 1 in the 2003 preseason, all Romo had to do was impress in his 2nd preseason game, and the starting quarterback job of America's team might be his to lose. But he fumbled, like a lot. He just wasn't ready for the spotlight, and after preseason, the starting quarterback job was given to Quincy Carter, as the Cowboys began the 2003 season with low expectations, and pretty much the only report I could find about the Cowboys echoed the opinions of everyone else at the time, that Bill Parcells will improve Dallas, but just not yet. But, well, through some miracle, the 2003 Cowboys were good. Not like talent-wise, but they did win 10 games in the season, way more than anyone expected, and did so with a majority of the credit going to the Cowboys coaching staff, obviously led by Parcells, but also had other future head coaches on the staff, like Mike Zimmer and the aforementioned Sean Payton. Also, in week 2 of that season, I just gotta point out how the Cowboys won one of the least likely games in NFL history, as with 11 seconds left and no timeouts, the Giants kicked the ball out of bounds, the literal only way they could have lost this game, and allowed the Cowboys to pick up some yardage and kick a field goal to force overtime. Then, of course, the Giants had already f***ed everything up beyond repair and lost the game 35-32, and this week 2 matchup was a great allegory for the entire Cowboys season. Pretty ugly on offense, usually unstoppable on defense, and somehow pretty entertaining overall. But the season ended prematurely in the wild card versus the Panthers, as the Cowboys' number 2 overall ranked defense, led by a combination of young studs and old men that only allowed 253.5 yards per game throughout the year, allowed 267 yards to Jake Delhomme at halftime and got stepped on 29-10. So the Cowboys had suffered yet another playoff defeat, but unlike in years past, this one was a little bit different because fans were more just excited for the future and were just happy to have a team that wasn't miserable to watch. And Jerry Jones himself tried to do everything he could to keep his first successful coach in a decade happy, seeing his potential in the future, bringing in 2 of his former players from the Jets, in Vinny Testaverde and yet another controversial wide receiver in the aging former Pro Bowler Keyshawn Johnson. And with those signings, the goofiness would get switched into full throttle, as during a practice, Cowboys wide receiver Antonio Bryant got a little heated, took off his pads, and tried to walk out of practice. But then, old-ass Bill Parcells hunts Bryant down and throws his own jersey at his forehead like a goddamn missile launcher. And within seconds, right hooks were being thrown all over the place. So that was pretty interesting, I guess. And as the season grew closer, one of the most important moments in Cowboys history took place when their starting quarterback from the previous season, Quincy Carter, failed a drug test, resulting in the Cowboys cutting him. And this was so significant because with Vinny Testaverde and the human dumpster that was Drew Henson already taking up 2 confirmed roster spots, with Quincy not on the team, the Cowboys' 2003 undrafted rookie looked like he might not get cut for the 2nd straight year. Besides that, the 2004 season for Dallas was a snap back to reality, and besides multiple dominant performances by Cowboys rookie running back Julius Jones late in the year, this Cowboys team had nothing special to offer whatsoever as they finished 6-10, reversing their record from last year. So, just like that, the Cowboys found themselves right back in the hole, as before the 2005 season, Bill Parcells really wanted to use their 11th overall pick on Marcus Spears, but Jerry was still making the final decision on every transaction, and despite Bill making an outrageous bet with Jerry, insisting on getting 5 trips a year for 5 years on Jerry's private plane if their draft pick wasn't good, Parcells was still overridden, and the Cowboys drafted future Hall of Famer DeMarcus Ware in the 1st round instead of Bill's guy in Spears. But once again, besides that little friendly wager, there's still not much to report about this Dallas team besides having Santana Moss and Washington dunk all over the Ring of Honor inductions of the Big 3. And somewhere there's probably some symbolism there, as also at the same time, Jerry Jones and the Cowboys continued to fade away from the NFL spotlight, with the Cowboys this year being led by Drew Bledsoe at quarterback and missed the playoffs for the 2nd straight year under Bill Parcells, this time going 9-7. Let me make sure I really grind this into your brain, that the Cowboys have never had less soul than right now. Jerry Jones's criticisms for how he handled the past and present of Dallas just kept flowing in. Anything remaining from their previous dynasty was now officially gone, while unfortunately not staying out of the news, and the team was in desperate need for any form of spark plug to bring this team back into semi-relevance. And if help was coming, it wasn't coming in the coaching department, as right out of the gate, Sean Payton saw that Bill Parcells probably wasn't going to be leaving the Cowboys' head coaching position vacant anytime soon, and took the head coaching job with the New Orleans Saints, and almost ended up getting the unknown Tony Romo to come along with him. So, with even more cracks forming all around him, what did Jerry do? Well, in a controversial move that is still speculated on today how much say Parcells had in the matter, the Cowboys doubled down on trying to become a soap opera, signing the most controversial wide receiver in the league in Terrell Owens, and somehow also the most controversial kicker there was in Mike Vanderjagt. Now, one of the moves worked out pretty great, with Terrell Owens having a massive bounce-back year for the Cowboys, breaking 1,000 yards, bringing some flair to a boring offense, and the other guy, he really didn't work out, as the idiot kicker Vanderjagt had the lowest success rate of his career with Dallas, only making 13 kicks through 11 weeks, which was enough to earn himself a termination courtesy of Gerald Jones. So the season began, and when it did, it was apparent this team still needed at least one more push from someone else to get them over the top, as through 6 weeks, the Cowboys found themselves at 3-2, only picking up dubs against teams lacking a winning record, and after a slow start by Drew Bledsoe in Week 7, Parcells benched the veteran to see if he had anything in the young Romo, and after a pretty rough first impression where Tony literally threw a pick on his first pass attempt, the Cowboys had seen enough, and Bill Parcells knew what he had to do. After 3.5 years of waiting, learning, and working in the shadows, the time had come. Former undrafted Dallas quarterback Tony Romo was announced as the starter against the Carolina Panthers in Week 8. And what happened immediately after Tony Romo got the job was a brief renaissance of hope and the beginning of a whole new era for the Dallas Cowboys.
2nd and 3. And Romo is going to throw that one into the end zone and caught by Owens. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen that. How many veteran quarterbacks would have the presence of mind to do what he just did?
Tony Romo had finally arrived, and he was here to save Jerry's crusty ass from eternal damnation, as he led the Cowboys to wins in 5 of his first 6 starts, made the Pro Bowl in just 10 total starts, and put up incredible stats for effectively a rookie quarterback, leading the Cowboys to another 9-7 season. But this time, a playoff appearance. Now, this was a Cowboys team that played way better than what their record was, as once Romo got into his groove, he along with Terrell Owens were the leading commanders on the 4th highest scoring offense in the league, putting up about 26.5 points per game, and when the Cowboys were set to face off against an already mid-passing defense in the Seattle Seahawks that was also decimated by injuries to their secondary, Romo and company were set up to have a field day in the wild card. And you know, this game between Seattle and Dallas was honestly one of the greatest wildcard games we've ever seen, as some of the rarest plays you'll ever witness seemingly happened one after the other in this game, but after the dust and whatnot finally settled, Matt Hasselbeck and last year's Super Bowl attendee Seahawks held a 1-point lead, giving Tony Romo one singular chance to go win the game himself. And you know, to his credit, Tony Romo was calm and collected, and after a huge run by their sophomore running back Julius Jones and the Seahawks defense barely stuffing Jason Witten, it would happen. As I know the Cowboys have had disastrous plays in the past, and of course will have catastrophic plays in the future, what would happen would be, in my opinion, the worst play in Cowboys history, and unfortunately a play that would set the tone for the entire new era for the Dallas Cowboys.
19-yard field goal attempt. Oh, it's fumbled by Romo, and then Romo's going to run to the end zone, and he's going to get tackled by Jordan Babineau.
It's so rough to watch every single time, but because Tony Romo was the backup quarterback earlier that year, for some reason I guess, he kept his holding duties which led to every holder's worst nightmare. Now, if one bad month or so for Tony Romo and a tough playoff loss was all that happened after this game, then it would only have been a normal traumatic moment for Cowboys fans. But this game, that one moment broke head coach Bill Parcells, who, his mental health was probably already going downhill leading up to the playoffs, and this botched snap definitely didn't help that.
So consider yourself sucked.
Bill just said he was worn out, and he didn't plan on losing any more years on his life than he already had, and officially resigned from the Cowboys after the 2006 season concluded. So, wow, it looked like for the first time since the early years of Jimmy Johnson, Jerry was actually able to put his ego to the side and work with a hard-ass coach in Parcells for the better of the organization, until, god damn it, Jerry started drinking publicly again, and years later told the media that the only reason he hired Bill Parcells was to sell tickets. And worst of all, he acknowledged that people said Jerry could only have yes-mans as coaches, so in order to get people to shut up, he had to bring in his ass. Okay, but that little rant wouldn't be released until years down the road, and in the present, Jerry Jones finally had momentum on the field, and now that he had it, he was not about to let it go, and immediately signed the guru of defense in former Chargers defensive coordinator Wade Phillips to a 3-year deal to become the new head coach. But besides that, Jerry kept the checkbook cold for most of the summer on players and focused more on the coaching staff for a change, bringing in new defensive and offensive coordinators, and for a little foreshadowing, I'm sure you could guess, but there's going to be more on one of these guys much later on. Anyway, all eyes immediately went to Tony Romo. Could he really replicate that magical season last year? Or maybe he was just a product of his system, and to spoil things without a fancy little beat drop or whatever, Tony Romo was a fucking baller in 2007. But not only was Tony great, it seemed as if all the pieces quietly growing in the background over the last couple of years had finally emerged, as the defensive side of the ball had DeMarcus Ware and Terrence Newman taking the ball away and sacking quarterbacks better than anybody, and the offensive side of the ball was equally loaded, with the Cowboys' new big three of Tony Romo and all-pros in Terrell Owens and Jason Witten all having historic seasons, and hell, even the O-line had emerged over the last 2 seasons as possibly the top unit in the entire NFL. I mean, this team had 13 Pro Bowlers on it and went 13-3 on the season. Why in the hell does nobody ever talk about them anymore? Tom Brady. Yeah, the Patriots went undefeated. Tom did Tom stuff, and the Cowboys got handed one of their 3 losses of the year in humiliating fashion as they got Tommed. But besides that, the Cowboys' only other 2 losses came in a 6-10 grinder versus the Eagles, and in Week 17 where they rested their starters against Washington. So with the Cowboys looking like a god-tier NFL team that nobody, other than Tom, could beat, they were wounded going into the playoffs, as in a Week 16 game versus the Panthers, Terrell Owens suffered a pretty bad high ankle sprain that he was forced to play through for the remainder of the postseason. So the Cowboys went into their divisional round game at home versus the New York Giants, a team that had gotten their ass handed to them twice this year by Romo and company, and the consensus belief was that Dallas would be able to handle business even if a tough battle would be necessary. But I guess creating a curse that would later inherit the Giants, before their playoff game, Tony Romo, Jason Witten, and a few others took a nice little couple-day trip to Cabo and partied it up and completely disregarded any responsibilities ahead of them. And not only were Cowboys players seemingly not taking their opponents seriously, but Sheev motherfucking Palpatine himself, Jerry Jones, decided it would be a terrific idea to allegedly hand out NFC Championship game tickets to all players, just so they could, I guess, get a head start on traveling plans. But are you serious, Jerry? Jerry was so confident his Cowboys were going to win this game, and with his schlong 1.5 feet down his own throat, the game began with the Cowboys starting off slow, but ended the first half with a dominant 20-play, 10-minute drive, then allowed Eli Manning to slice right through the Dallas defense in less than a minute to tie the game, and that would only be the beginning for the Cowboys' screw-ups. Late in the third quarter, on a massive 3rd and 14, Romo somehow escaped pressure and found a wide-open Patrick Creighton who... can't hang on to the ball. Then, Tony Romo himself had to take his turn falling onto the bloodied sword of Dallas, as he killed 2 Dallas drives in crucial moments in the fourth quarter, trying to keep plays alive, first taking a sack, and later on picking up an intentional grounding. But even after all of this, the Cowboys defense bailed them out, and Dallas's overwhelming talent had bought them one more opportunity to achieve redemption. 3rd and 11, with a chance to make their first NFC Championship appearance post their 90s dynasty, Romo drops back and fires an incomplete pass to Patrick Creighton. Just a routine overthrow, right? Well, if you run that film back and take a closer gander, you'll notice that Patrick Creighton seemingly gets a step or two on his defender, then stops sprinting for just a brief second. And if you were to keep running his route all the way through, there's a strong possibility Tony Romo's ball placement would have hit him square in the chest. But admittedly, that is just speculation, and what really happened was an interception on the next play. And just like that, the 2007 Cowboys season, their best by a mile since the 90s, went out in nightmarish fashion in their first playoff game. This was a deep kick to the old family jewels, and everyone knew that too. Hell, even Terrell Owens knew the backlash was coming minutes after the game ended, doing everything he could to defend his quarterback in an interview that definitely belongs in the post-game Hall of Fame. So now that Jerry's pride and ego were damaged beyond repair, from here on out, things will only get worse and worse as the Cowboys dive deeper and deeper into their well of eternal despair. First, the Cowboys found themselves on Hard Knocks because, come on, Tony Romo and Terrell Owens on the Cowboys is good TV. But when football actually needed to be played, the Cowboys picked up right where they left off, as through Week 5, Dallas was 4-1, while the Tony Romo to Jason Witten connection was near unstoppable. But just as quickly as this season rose, boy did it fall apart. And the funny part is, the Cowboys didn't even know it at the time, as in an intense Week 6 matchup with Kurt Warner and the Cardinals, the Cowboys miraculously were able to tie the game at 24 to force overtime. Then, in a combination of some of the most disastrous plays in the history of this organization, Tony Romo sprained his finger taking a sack, an injury that would later prove to be the catalyst to sink the Cowboys even deeper, and because it's not easy to throw a football with a broken finger, Romo proceeded to tank the drive, and after a punt block, the Cardinals won the game 30-24. So with Romo injured for 3 games, and also unironically with Cowboys punter Matt McBriar being out for the season as well, the Cowboys under Brad Johnson, a quarterback who is only known for being one of the worst Super Bowl winning quarterbacks of all time, fell to a 5-4 record. And obviously, without Romo in the lineup, of course everyone suffered, but Terrell Owens paid the highest toll out of everyone, as his stats during Brad's reign reduced him into a prime Danny Amendola at best, and the Cowboys' plan from here was to hold out hope that Tony Romo could save their season by himself. He came back, and right away, Tony Romo was that guy, most of the time. But right here, right now, was one of those times, as the Cowboys bounced back to win 4 out of their next 5 games, and sitting with a 9-5 record, they looked like a team that could make a lot of opposing fans drink a lot of alcohol. That is, if Jerry's curse didn't return in full force, as the media's worst fears about the 2008 Cowboys before the season came true, as a still very confusing storyline to this day would unfold, with Terrell Owens, the Cowboys' star receiver, who allegedly told his offensive coordinator Jason Garrett that he believed the Cowboys needed to spread the ball more, which is, a valid thing to say, which somehow eventually led to a huge article being published just 4 days after claiming that wait, what? Terrell Owens was having an issue with Tony Romo all of a sudden? Now, like I said, things get a little complicated because the only source that was listed to make this claim was an anonymous source from inside the Dallas organization. And although many have speculated the snitch was Jason Garrett, if there was one, and further evidence may help this wild idea in the future, but to this day, we really have no concrete evidence to support the Ginger's betrayal. And with that, one singular article basically turned every Cowboys press into a gladiator match between Terrell Owens and hundreds of microphones. So back to football, where on the field, going into Week 16, the Cowboys had one of the most important regular season matchups they've ever had, with this being the last game ever the Cowboys would play in Texas Stadium before moving to Jerry World a season later. And in this ever-important game, the Cowboys were set to face off against the Baltimore Ravens, a pretty good team this season, but last year they weren't. And I say that because it is widely speculated that Jerry Jones himself saw the Ravens as a newer expansion team and went out of his way to have Dallas face them in their last game in Texas Stadium. And well, if that was true, he got his wish. Ravens vs. Cowboys, with a chance to save their season in the presence of the Dallas legends of the past. And in this game, they got embarrassed, blowing a perfect opportunity to win the game, allowing Willis McGahee to rip off a 77-yard touchdown run, silencing the Dallas crowd forever. But wait, as if Emmitt Smith didn't already want to down enough bleach on the sideline, Ravens fullback LaRon McClain houses another touchdown, this one for 82 yards. But Jerry's ego needed to be punished more, and in the Cowboys' final game of the season versus the division rival Eagles, where the winner would basically make the playoffs if a few things went right for Philly, these two teams hate each other and should have had all the motivation they needed to fight to the death, but instead, the Eagles mangled whatever was left of the Cowboys' husk that was only held together by drama and Jerry Jones' delusion, as the Eagles won the game 44-6, eliminating the Cowboys from playoff contention. How sad. But at least the Cowboys had time to get better and decided to cut Terrell Owens in one of the most puzzling moves of the last couple of years. On the surface. You see, behind the curtains, however, it seemed as if Cowboys fans Jerry Jones, Jason Garrett, and Tony Romo all had a hand to play in the controversial receiver's departure, and to be fair, off the field he wasn't doing himself any favors either. So, with Owens out, going into 2009, although record-wise the Cowboys looked like they had drastically improved with crazy wins like their Week 15 dub against the, at the time, undefeated and Super Bowl champion Saints, it was clear that they were just a solid peg or two behind the NFL's top dogs. And despite giving the fan base a small taste of happiness with their first playoff win since 1996 against the Eagles, Dallas's fans' palates were instantly filled with depression instead, as the boys got murked by Brett Favre and the Vikings 34-3 in one of the most lopsided divisional round games ever. And that depressing loss ended up leaking into and infecting the entire 2010 season as well, as after an abysmal 1-7 start, mostly due to Tony Romo breaking his collarbone, which ended his season, Jerry Jones didn't care, and through 9 games, fired head coach Wade Phillips and promoted offensive coordinator Jason Garrett to interim head coach. Now, with how Jason Garrett is viewed today, you'd think Dallas would just lose every game from here on out, especially without Romo, but the opposite happened, as with the usual guys in DeMarcus Ware, Jason Witten, and now Pro Bowl wide receiver Miles Austin playing at an elite level, along with new, very impactful rookies truly finding their way as the season progressed, the Cowboys actually finished the season 6-10, which, still wasn't good, but whatever. And from here on out, as you'll see, is exactly why I titled the video the way I did. It was almost as if Jason Garrett as a coach just put an imaginary cap on this team, because although obviously their future was bright, it was as if they could just be no better than mid. And as the Cowboys finished the 2011 season, their first full year under Garrett with a healthy Tony Romo, they went 8-8. And then in 2012, in similar circumstances, 8-8. And in 2013, why not? Let's add on the third straight 8-8 season to drive Jerry Jones senile. Now, when I said senile, boy, I meant it. And in these 3 years where the Cowboys became masters of mediocrity and playing down to competition, the curse just engulfed Jerry, as the man was all over the place. One day he's rapping about Papa John's to mask the pain, the other he's talking about glory holes and getting a little frisky with people he shouldn't be, and doing everything in his power to force the Cowboys to draft Johnny Manziel. Yeah, so it's safe to say Jerry was losing it, but Although the Cowboys were boring and disturbingly average, it should also be said that during this time period from 2011 through 2013, Tony Romo wasn't as consistent as he used to be, but the stats and eye tests still proved that he was at the very least still a serviceable to good quarterback in the NFL. And the big problems arose on defense, where the 2013 Cowboys struggled mightily in every department, and it looked like things were only going to get uglier when one of the cornerstones of the Dallas Cowboys over the last 8 years departed for good, as DeMarcus Ware officially signed to the Denver Broncos. But this train wreck had already been on its collision course for a while now, and all the experts saw it coming a mile away, with nobody even expecting anything above a top 20 finish this season. And even Palpatine seemed to see a tough season ahead for the boys, effectively saying, hey, who cares if we even make the playoffs? I'm still stacking up fat rolls from the TV ratings, so what else even matters? And then, in week 1, the executioner walked towards Dallas holding the axe and watched the Cowboys get crushed by the 49ers 28-17, with the game being over in just the second quarter. So now, all hope seemed lost. Tony Romo, at the age of 34, looked like his chronic back problems and other various injuries were beginning to consume him, while the defense appeared to be one of the worst they've had in the Romo era, with Sean Lee suffering a season-ending injury even before the season began. But for some reason, this 2014 Cowboys team defied every last strain of logic that even exists, and in this year turned in one of the most electric Cowboys campaigns of all time.
Oh, looking the other way, and it's caught for the touchdown by Terrence Williams. Second down, back to Murray. Cuts it to the inside, and Murray to the end zone.
How about them Cowboys? Miraculously, Dallas was back, as they ended their 8-8 streak and buried at 15 feet under, going 12-4 on the season. And although the Cowboys weren't able to keep Romo healthy for the whole year, as the man broke his back in 2 spots against Washington, but to the players' credit, the Cowboys' O-line did as good of a job as any line possibly could have, as due to the combinations of all-pros Travis Frederick, Tyron Smith, and some guy they drafted over Johnny Manziel named Zach Martin, held the fort down for Romo while humiliating some of the best defensive players in the league in the process. And that was just the O-line. The actual offensive stars were also shining brighter than ever for Dallas too, as by looking at Dallas's new big three in Tony Romo, running back DeMarco Murray, and Dez Bryant, if you just, squinted a little, you might be reminded of a different unit from so long ago, and I swear that's not that big of a stretch to make too, as all 3 members made all-pro teams, had unbelievable stats with DeMarco taking home the Offensive Player of the Year award, while Tony Romo and even DeMarco Murray again both received a small amount of MVP attention. Not much else to say other than this season just felt special, racking up statement wins on their way to the playoffs, like handing the Legion of Boom their only home loss that season, and clinched an NFC East title with the demolition of the Colts 42-7. So here was Dallas, set to face off against the hungry and scary Detroit Lions. A very rare thing to say about Detroit in the 2010s, but this was not a team you wanted to see this early on, as Stafford and Calvin Johnson's connection was stronger than ever, and that offensive duo was also aided by the 3rd best defense in the NFL, with full-grown men in Darius Slay, Ziggy Ansah, so many more guys, but more importantly, Tony Romo's back's worst fear, Ndamukong Suh. This game had all the potential to be really great, and I guess it was, but early on, the Cowboys were getting manhandled. With a DeMarco Murray injury hampering the offense, Stafford and company took advantage of quicker possessions with a Reggie Bush shifty score, putting Detroit up 14-0. After battling back, though, Dallas eventually took a 3-point lead, but with the Lions driving and 8 minutes on the clock in the 4th, their lead was far from safe. But luckily for them, I guess, this was the exact moment when this game got a little wacky. First, on 3rd and 1, Stafford tries to find his tight end Brandon Pettigrew, a man who was only on the Lions in the first place because of a terrible trade Jerry Jones made for Lions wide receiver bust Roy Williams. And as he throws the ball on this play, a flag was thrown, as it looked like there was some obvious contact, but then it was picked up. Interesting. Regardless on how you stand on this still very controversial play, the Lions didn't exactly help their chances of winning this game after that sequence with a whopping 10-yard punt immediately after. The Cowboys took advantage of this opportunity and another Detroit penalty to find Terrence Williams for a huge touchdown, but Matthew Stafford still had one more chance, and on his final drive, Cowboys rookie defensive end DeMarcus Lawrence picks up a fumble and then fumbles himself, still keeping Lions fans' hopes alive. But then, finally, in poetic fashion, on 4th down and 3, DeMarcus Lawrence, fueled by rage, was the man who sacked Matthew Stafford, ending the game once and for all, and the Cowboys defeated Detroit 24-20. So the Cowboys escaped with their lives, but Tony Romo did not leave the arena unscathed, as the man with a robotic back was sacked a season-high 6 times. So although Detroit lost, they definitely took a huge chunk out of the Cowboys on their way down. So now, the day of judgment has come for the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones, as in the divisional round, the Cowboys would be traveling to Lambeau Field to play against the Green Bay Packers, the exact same place where a young Tony Romo once grew up and learned how to throw a football. It was now time for a real challenge, as standing in front of them was the Green Bay Packers led by Aaron Rodgers, and they were not to be taken lightly. But although Dallas did jump out to an early lead once the game began, the Cheesemen proved that they were worthy by capitalizing on a first-half meltdown by Romo and the boys, keeping the game close 10-14. So with the first half starting out fast, early in the second, the biggest blunder of the game would ensue, as one of the new age Cowboys Big Three members slipped up, with the best running back in the league, DeMarco Murray, getting a little too close to Julius Peppers, losing a devastating fumble that not only gave up possession of the ball, but a pretty surefire touchdown that would have swung the momentum for Dallas. But the game wasn't over yet, and as the struggle raged on, battle fatigue continued to set in for Romo, as he once again got sacked way more than average in this playoff game, getting dropped 4 more times, and sustained yet another injury, this one to his hand. Which takes us to the Cowboys' final drive. 4th and 2, Tony Romo scans the field and knows that Jason Witten is double-teamed, and instead of taking the check down to Cole Beasley that would probably have picked up a first down, he decided to go a different route. As remember, Tony Romo is a Jerry Jones player after all, and lobbed up a ball to Dez Bryant, his all-pro wide receiver, and, you know, I'm sure you already know what happens next anyways.
Here's one down the sideline, pass caught by Dez Bryant.
After review, it has been determined that the receiver did not maintain.
Did he catch it? Did he not? Who knows? But what is known is that Aaron Rodgers was still on the other side of the ball with plenty of time left, so even if Dez's catch had been ruled a touchdown, who knows what could have happened after that imaginary play, and Tony Romo was forced to watch from the sidelines as Aaron Rodgers iced the game with his last drive, meaning the Cowboys were sent home 26-21. This game took Cowboys fans' hearts, put them on a chopping board, and diced them up into tiny little pieces, because although it may not look like it on the surface, this Dallas team was probably way closer to reaching the Super Bowl than any other team before it, as waiting for them in the NFC Championship game, if Dallas would have been victorious, was the Seattle Seahawks, and as history has proven, they were capable of matching up with and even beating Seattle on the road earlier this season. So yeah, hypothetically, maybe if a few balls rolled differently, the Cowboys would have been in the Super Bowl, but that's all hypotheticals. At the end of the day, this was just a tough loss, but, you know, whatever. As long as Tony Romo just doesn't take up yoga and hurt his back any more than it already is, and Jerry can, you know, stop being Jerry, then the Cowboys should have no problem running it back to be fierce contenders once more. Or, in a very similar situation as their 2010 season, the Cowboys had a horrible hangover, and eventually, greed and overuse of Tony Romo came to a boiling point, as Tony's career in Dallas looked like it was up in the air after 2 more injuries in this season alone. First fracturing his collarbone in his non-throwing shoulder against the Eagles, and then right after getting out of the hospital bed, went right back into war and broke his clavicle against the Panthers. And of course, without Romo playing, instead the Cowboys were, of course, led by a combination of first-ballot Hall of Famers, and tack on DeMarco Murray signing with the Eagles before the year, and Dez Bryant breaking a bone in his foot in the first game of the season, and what you get is a perfect recipe for a stinky 4-12 campaign. The worst the Cowboys have regurgitated out since Jimmy Johnson's first year with the team back in 1989. This season didn't really have much to it. Basically, everyone was just injured, and hell, even Jerry Jones found himself on IR with the daunting hip replacement surgery. But that doesn't mean it was all dark and gloomy. At least Dallas's O-line was still elite, and because of their impressive level of suckitude, the Cowboys held the 4th overall pick in the 2016 NFL Draft. And when the time came to send in that pick, if history's shown us anything, Jerry Jones loves his playmakers and filled the hole that DeMarco Murray left behind and selected Ohio State's Ezekiel Elliott. And then in a stroke of luck, had at least the second best quarterback in the 2016 class fall right into their laps with Mississippi State's Dak Prescott. So with more new blood coming in and the Cowboys' cycle of finding a random quarterback later in the draft that everyone overlooks repeating itself, all looked well. But then, the cycle was instantly accelerated when one of the main characters of this tragedy was killed off, when Tony Romo went down in preseason with the final back injury of his career that allowed his backup to take the reins. With Romo down and becoming the new Drew Bledsoe, the narrative completely did a 180 for the Cowboys. From a team that had possible Super Bowl aspirations to, well, honestly, maybe we should just strap up and let the tank run its course. But almost right out of the gate, the Cowboys somehow were led by, for my money, the most impressive rookie quarterback running back duo in the modern era in Dak and Zeke, led the Cowboys to a 13-win season. Let me repeat that. In the season where the Dallas Cowboys were expected to do absolutely nothing, they won 13 games. And although most people at the time were pretty accepting of the new guys gelling with the old, things became a little bit more complicated when on November 11th, coming back in a cyborg suit, Tony Romo was medically cleared to play, but the coaches still decided it was best for the team to stick with Dakota Prescott. And obviously, there was no sensible human who truly believed Dak should be benched in the middle of this season, as long as Dallas had success, but as more teams adjusted to Dak's skill set and got film on him, from weeks 12 through 15, Dak very noticeably slowed down, with his numbers going down across the board from where they were just a few weeks ago. And with the Cowboys losing a game, the murmurings kept creeping into Jerry's head, telling him to give Tony Romo one more chance. Still though, things would have had to get really bad for Tony to ever make an appearance with the blue star on his head ever again, and after a perfect performance to clinch a bye versus the Lions in Week 16, Dak Prescott, Zeke, the O-line, and a still strong defense enjoyed their bye week, didn't go to Cabo, and waited to see who their opponent was. And as they waited, once the final buzzer sounded between their two potential opponents, Jerry Jones had an episode.
Packers win 38-13.
After review, it has been determined that the receiver did not maintain.
Uh-oh, that Rodgers guy is back, and all before the game, it seemed like the curse really got a hold of Jerry, as the man was battling spirits and things of that nature all week long, leading up to the Cowboys' first playoff game since the Dez Bryant-DeMarco Murray incident. It was as if Jerry didn't want to say anything, but deep down, he knew the Cowboys had no chance. He knew he gave away any opportunity to make a Super Bowl to the football deity all those years ago. And as the divisional game began, Jerry was forced to watch the young Cowboys struggle with the bright lights, and you know, just maybe a singular thought may have crossed his mind, and even ironically, announcer Troy Aikman may have thought the same exact thing.
Yeah, but you wonder as they go into the second half, there's no question that Romo gives them an opportunity for more big plays.
If the struggling continued for Dallas, maybe trying your luck at a potential spark plug was the Cowboys' best option, but seemingly as quickly as that idea could have been mildly plausible, it was dismissed, with Dak going into the Zen mode, finding Dez Bryant, and eventually with the help of the defense led by guys like Sean Lee and Barry Church, they truly shut down the Tony Romo narrative forever, tying the game at 28 apiece. Next thing you know, Jerry is pacing back and forth, sweating buckets, watching as both quarterbacks continue to ball out, and the respective kickers both nailed shots to tie the game at 31 now. So this was it. The final drive for the Packers. All the Cowboys had to do was stop one 3rd and 20 conversion. But didn't happen. Take a long look, Cowboys fans. Really let it set in. This happened because Jerry's ancestral stench was just too strong, and Rodgers did the thing with the thing and created a core memory for Dallas fans everywhere, sending the Cowboys home in a 34-31 thrilling matchup in Jerry World. Once again, more heartbreak, and even more chest pain would come when the Dallas Cowboys parted ways with Tony Romo forever, as the man who saved the Cowboys from quarterback purgatory would officially never return to action. Then, once the season began, the Cowboys started out fine, I guess, but looking like nowhere near their dominant selves from just last year. And then, things truly were derailed for the rest of the season when Jerry Jones and Zeke lost his legal battle versus Roger, when Ezekiel Elliott was suspended for 6 games, and without the Ewoks' presence, Dallas went 9-7 and missed the playoffs. At this point, history was just comically repeating itself, starting the offseason off with Dez Bryant, another semi-controversial but still productive receiver, like one Terrell Owens who came before him, found himself kicked to the curb after a meeting with Jerry Jones and his flesh puppet Jason Garrett. And of course, Dez was pissed after he lost his job, going to Twitter to rant about the Cowboys' awful play calling, something that I'm sure Terrell Owens would have had no problem doing at the time if Twitter was, a thing. Once again, from 2018 through 2020, the Cowboys rinsed and repeated, proving they were still a good team at best and mediocre at worst, as the main headlines to report from this time skip was Dallas winning a playoff game versus the Seahawks in 2018, which was, sort of cool, but who cares? Travis Frederick retiring from the NFL after the 2019 season, and Dak Prescott missing almost the entire 2020 year with a compound fracture. But besides that, there's nothing too special to report from these seasons, with once more the Cowboys proving that they were the best at being mid. Which takes us to the beginning of the 2021 season, where at this point we're looking at a version of Jerry Jones that has to search deep within his soul to find a compelling reason to keep going. But a Dallas team that has remained similar with Dak and Zeke still being the core of the offense, the O-line still being led by Zach Martin and Tyron Smith, and the defense as always being led by a combination of young guys and veterans. And speaking of young guys, say what you want, but if the Cowboys can do one thing right, most of the time, it's find and draft talent. As in both 2020 and 21, the Cowboys nailed both of their first-round picks, drafting a perennial Pro Bowl receiver and Dez replacement in Ceedee Lamb, and one of the best rookies and defensive players we've ever seen so early on in Micah Parsons. But besides the draft, by far the two biggest moves Dallas made was the hiring of new offensive coordinator Kellen Moore and D coordinator Dan Quinn. But then, after all these years, Jerry finally pulled the trigger, firing one of the few men to master the art of the 8-8 season in Jason Garrett. And now with his puppet gone, Jerry then turned around and hired former Packers coach Mike McCarthy. You sure about that, Jerry? He might, unintentionally kick the old PTSD back into full force, but it's probably worth the risk. And as the 2021 year unfolded, be it because Dak took a leap after his injury or Kellen Moore really elevated the offensive play, this year's Dallas team became every analytical guy's wet dream as they finished the season with the highest scoring offense in the NFL, averaging a monstrous 30.4 points per game, and pairing that with an elite defense led to all DVOA metrics naming this 2021 Cowboys team as, statistically speaking, the best team Dallas had fielded since 1995. So, led by their supercharged offense and rejuvenated defense, Jerry's boys went 12-5, and once again had another home playoff game to try and capitalize on a season where expectations were actually laid out for them. And who would be waiting for them than none other than the team that arguably started it all. Way back before Jerry Jones gave up the right to the deed of his soul in the 1981 season, Dallas lost a 12-win year to the San Francisco 49ers on a play you may have heard murmurings of called The Catch. And even going back to the times in the 90s where these two teams effectively played in the Super Bowl every time they met, there was real hatred between these two organizations. So with that little history lesson out of the way, what you get is some obvious negative voodoo going on for the Cowboys. But honestly, going into this game, Jerry probably didn't even care. He must have been happy that the Cowboys were even remotely good again, and now that the boys were making him some more money, that's all he needed. So maybe when the 49ers came out and punched the Cowboys straight in the mouth, controlling the pace in the process, there's a chance Jerry didn't even feel anything anymore. But just like that Packers game in 2016, although the Cowboys seemingly always start slow, they battle back, and after a Jimmy Garoppolo interception and a Dak rushing touchdown with 2 minutes on the clock, trailing by just 6 points at home, Prescott and the Cowboys had a chance at completing a potential legacy drive. But they blew it. The 49ers defense clamped up. And, I guess for more comedy, the 49ers decided to piss their drive away and have the ball go straight back to Dallas, and instantly allowed the worst possible play, with the boys pulling off a cute little lateral thing, getting out of bounds. You know the drill. Dallas had no timeouts, so every play had to go to the sideline. So with 14 seconds left, QB draw. The Cowboys decided to run a quarterback draw up the middle when they needed a touchdown, and although I'm not entirely sure what the end goal here was, once again, ironically, Tony Romo, the announcer of this game, pointed out that Dak screwed it up by not immediately finding the ref to have him spot the ball, sacrificing valuable seconds in the process. I mean, do you expect anything less from the Cowboys at this point, though? And after that meltdown versus the 49ers, 2022 was pretty much the exact same season. Same head coach, same coordinators, Dak and Zeke on offense, and now Ceedee Lamb was helping to run the show. The only real difference from the 2021 roster was Amari Cooper signing up for purgatory and the defense getting marginally better with experience. Other than that, exact same team, same exact record of 12-5. But this time, because the NFC East division was much more competitive than in years past, the Cowboys were forced to play in the wild card and humored the one and only Thomas Brady as the Cowboys flexed what this team's full potential could be, with the defense showing complete dominance while Dak Prescott was diming up everything in sight, playing a near flawless football game. Okay, nice. So the Cowboys got a little playoff win under their belt, which should give them some confidence against their divisional round opponent, who is the 49ers. Again, same team, different place. And for the second year in a row, the Cowboys were favored to win. But if you're this far into the video and think the Cowboys follow the laws of logic, then I clearly haven't done a good job at being a YouTuber here. Anyway, the game was underway, and for the entire first half and bleeding into the third quarter, the name of the game was defense, with the Cowboys D doing a great job containing the 49ers' inevitable run game, while the 49ers defense also was very effective in stifling Dak Prescott. And even when the 49ers gave the Cowboys some breathing room and the offense got into a small groove, Dak in particular would just make a mistake, missing a read early on, and had the offense stall out on him in very critical moments. Then in the second half, it just continued on. The Cowboys seemingly couldn't break through the 49ers defense, and with every single 49ers HB toss play dialed up, more and more of Jerry Jones deteriorated by the second, until eventually, after the Cowboys' second to last drive, which resulted in 2 incomplete passes and a sack, that was it. The 49ers took care of business from there again. The Dallas Cowboys were embarrassed in front of the world, letting the 49ers push them around again, this time losing 12-19. Which leads us to the modern era. Dak Prescott is still the quarterback, Mike McCarthy's the coach, and more importantly, the one character that has stayed with us on this long journey, Jerry Jones, is still the owner slash president slash general manager slash dictator in Dallas. And although all of that cursed stuff about Jerry Jones may have been blown out of proportion, when you look back at the Cowboys, you kind of find a common pattern. Even when they have great years like 2014 or 2007, it seems like those seasons are peppered in with a ton of mid-seasons, and it's been that way ever since the dynasty fell in the 90s. And in the modern era, the Cowboys, one of the most rich history franchises in all of sports, are looked at as nothing more than a laughingstock and have lost all respect around the entire NFL. Anyways, if you like this video, then subscribe, because I got a lot of videos on the channel just like this one. And if you like this video, then watch this video right here where I look back at the entire Raiders pain cycle. It's pretty good, or at least some people have said that, and trust me. Anyways, until next time.